Namaste and welcome to Global Perspectives produced by Today's Youth Asia. In the TV show Global Perspectives, we bring to you documentaries and films from around the world that provide insights and understandings on global affairs. In today's episode, we are featuring the documentary Leading the Way to Peace, directed by Kathy and Rebecca Sanga and produced by John B. Kroc Institute for Peace and Justice, University of San Diego. Leading the Way to Peace features 4 inspiring women peacemakers and the personal stories of courage, achievement, and hope. It carries the message that without women's equal participation in peace process, neither justice nor democracy can be achieved.
They began to attack the civilian population. Many trains came with dead bodies on them. Around 12 o'clock we heard shot, and as usual my mother went around covering the windows.
They'll take people out of their houses, put them against the wall and start shooting.
Complete villages disappeared because the shortages and the killed they usually killed women and children.
In the fall of 2004, 4 women from very different countries around the world arrived in San Diego, California. Each was coming because of her work, but it was not a typical business trip.
Gracias por tomar el tiempo de venir a escuchar las historias de 4 luchadoras por la paz. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for taking your time to hear this night, to listen the stories of 4 women struggling for peace in the world.
These 4 women participated in an 8-week residency at the Joan B. Kroc Institute for Peace and Justice at the University of San Diego. Here, each woman's personal journey to becoming a peacemaker was documented by an assigned writer and film crew. Today, there's an essential job for women. It does not require a certain uniform or wardrobe. There's no particular class or identity needed. Indeed, there's no one educational background that's required. Peacemakers can be mothers and daughters, wives and partners, artists or organizers, and nuns and revolutionaries. They can be in the midst of conflict or the survivors of war, or any combination of these. In Sri Lanka, one was even a tree climber.
One of my favorite things was climbing tree, because we lived in a house where I had 6 aunts and 2 uncles. And sometimes it's good to have so many aunts and uncles because they spoil you. Sometimes you get punished. So only way that I could get away from punishment is climbing trees, because my aunts couldn't climb trees, because obviously Muslim women are not allowed to climb trees. So only I knew how to climb trees because my father trained me. In order to correct my abnormal behavior, she just thought that sending me to convent school is a good thing, because nuns will make sure that I grow up as a ideal, suitable woman for a man. Every time I climb trees, the next day that tree will have this wire wrapped around, and my friends used to say, you touched this tree now?
In the 1970s, Shireen's father allowed her many rights and responsibilities not normally given to Muslim girls. This included climbing trees. Shireen believes that he was preparing her for the unforeseeable responsibilities that would be heaped on her by the conflict bubbling up in her homeland. Born in Lucknow, India in 1935, Zarina was the youngest in an upwardly mobile family with 5 daughters and 2 sons. She realized from early childhood that parents celebrate the birth of a son, not a daughter. She grew up in India during the last 12 years of the British colonization, before the August 1947 partition that called for the creation of Pakistan and India as separate states.
At this time that this largest migration in history took place, trainloads of people came from either side, and many trains came with dead bodies on them. It was a terrible time that we went through.
After passage of the Partition Act, 10 million Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs were forced to leave their homes to seek safety inside whichever territory they were promised.
And then refugee camps were set up, and women went out to look after these refugees. Everything was dislocated. Pakistan had no system of government because India inherited whatever the British left, but Pakistan inherited a land where there was no office, there was no typewriter, there were no chairs, so everything had to be put in some order to set up a government. I finished school soon after partition. That was, I think, in 48, and I went to college in Lahore and did my graduation, and then I left. Was very lucky that I was able to go to London and study for 2 years. I studied history, and history became alive to me as it had never been before.
At the age of 44, Serena met the man she would marry.
It was only in office hours that I could work, and he was very strict that after office hours, all the time I had would be spent with him. So that was the understanding that we had.
It happened in June of 1954. My mother, together with other women members of the extended family, they were washing clothes in the middle of the patio. Suddenly, they began to hear that some planes were flying over the neighborhood. And all of a sudden, those planes began to shoot. The rest of the women ran away to protect themselves. But my mother she became paralyzed because she was so scared. She couldn't move. What she did was she took a piece like a basin for washing the clothes. She took it. It was made by metal in those years, and she protected her stomach. What she was doing, I understood later on, she was protecting me. Instead of, I think that the more natural reaction could have been to protect her head, but she didn't. She protected her future baby. I was born at the end of that year. Then I realized that my whole life, the rest of my life, was for the rest of people of my generation, was marked because of what happened that June 1954. I have realized that I have been an organizer my whole life. I like to organize people doing something. I was too young enough to realize exactly what was going on in the political atmosphere. But I recall looking at my father and my grandfather. They were so angry when a coup took place in Guatemala. One night he came from his job and said, "Look, another coup took place in Guatemala. This is terrible, this is horrible. I am fed up with so many military men ruling this country." I became active at school because I was studying in a public big high school. And I realized that we were lacking many things. We didn't have enough desks, we didn't have enough blackboards, we didn't have a library. We lacked a lot of things. So I became engaged in the activities of the Students' Association in order to try to solve these problems. By that time I was elected president of that Students' Association, so I felt a big responsibility over me.
I was born in Freetown, and interestingly, Freetown is the western area, it's the capital of the country. We are 8 in the family, 4 boys, 4 girls. I'm the 3rd child, but 2nd daughter in the family.
Within much of Africa, it's customary to blend the extended family with the nuclear family, often giving child-rearing responsibilities with those thought to have more time. Christiana and her younger sister were raised by their grandmother.
She was a washerwoman, and she married and lived in an area in the city that was the slum area. We used to go to the river, you know, the stream. There's a little stream there where she'd wash the clothes, and then after ironing them, we'll take them to the people. The area where we lived, there were loads of children. At a very early age, I began to realize I was different. For a while, I was the only girl going to school. These children, they'll be playing all over the place, and I'd want to go and join them, and Granny would refuse and said, "Well, no, you need to study." And I used to be mad. I want to play. I realized they were not going to school. So then I started being the teacher. So I would teach them what I had learned in school. So even for a long time, even now, some of them call me the teacher.
An essential quality of her grandmother that influenced Christiana early on was her grandmother's spirituality.
I grew up with the sense that God is not something out there that, okay, you just go to church and you worship, but there is a relationship, because the way she used to speak is as if she was talking to a friend, you know. And again, I think that influenced me to go into religious life, to be a nun.
In 1969, Christiana left Sierra Leone for Ireland to join the Sisters of St. Joseph of Cluny, the nuns originally sent to work in her country. While in Ireland, Christiana completed her college education. Upon completing her studies in Ireland, Christiana, who was entirely committed to education, especially for women and girls, took a teaching post in northern Sierra Leone.
I was running an all-girls school. The average would be 10 or 15 girls finishing out of 200. And this used to get to me, and I wonder, you know, what's happening to the girls, you know, along the line. The more I worked with them, the more I realized that there is so much to be done, and there is so much more I could give outside of the convent.
The decision to leave the convent was not easy, taking many years of contemplation and finally retreat into a 3-month midlife crisis program in Cottonwood, Idaho. Within the 20 years of her life that she dedicated to the church and teaching in Sierra Leone, Christiana had risen to Mother Superior of her convent and head of her school. She was concerned that her leaving the convent might affect the girls there and let her community down. Because her vows had become final, she had to receive official dispensation from the Vatican to leave. When Rome granted this, she began a new chapter in her life.
Even though I was leaving, I hadn't a clue what I was going to do, where I was going to go. But I was not too bothered. I just believed that God was at work and He'd show me the way. After 6 months, the head of state, who was then army, because a coup had taken place in '92. At that stage I was out of the country. So by the time I went back, there was a coup, and then the fellow that was heading the army, he said he wanted professionals to run the government while they in the army concentrate on the fighting the rebels. I was asked to assist the minister's deputy. 3 months after, they asked me to take over the ministry. So I became Minister of Education.
Upon becoming the Minister of Education, Christiana joined a 19-member cabinet where she was the only woman. Motivated to address the 90% female illiteracy rate in Sierra Leone, she committed herself to starting a new branch of the Forum for African Women Educationalists, an organization focused on the education of girls in Africa. She worked hard on new gender-inclusive, gender-sensitive educational policy. It is still in use today. In 1994, after 15 years of marriage, Serena was forced to close a contented chapter in her life when her dear husband died of a heart attack.
When my husband died, I had a little difficult period, but soon my friends took me to certain societies, and what I got interested was in the Pakistan-India People's Forum for Peace and Democracy.
At the age of 62, Zarina became a spokesperson for peace and reconciliation over customary hatreds. She accepted the post of chairperson of the Islamabad chapter of the Pakistan-India People's Forum for Peace and Democracy.
It was not till 1998, May 11th and the 13th, that India exploded its next nuclear device, and it was in the capital that we held rallies against this and condemned the explosion. We took a petition to the Indian High Commission and expressed our condemnation, and we called upon the government of Pakistan not to respond madness by madness, as it would only lead to an arms race between the two countries. 2 weeks later, Pakistan responded on the 28th of May. They burnt effigies of the Indian leaders. There was jubilation all over the country because people had been told that atomic bomb would raise the status of the country and we were equal to India, and that it was an Islamic bomb, and we were the only Muslim country that had this atom bomb. I decided that we would have a press conference to express our condemnation. This was followed by the government's suspension of fundamental rights. The government wanted to prevent citizens from mobilizing opinion against nuclear explosion. I still remember late at night we were calling the press sending emails, making calls, I and Nasreen, to get the press to come to our press conference the next day. We'd written out a condemnation which I read out to them when we had at our meeting. And when the first line I said, we condemn Pakistan's explosion, and the pressman said, please repeat that statement, meaning that how dare you say such a thing. And I repeated it. And in this time, there's a youth group, the Jamaat-e-Islami, the religious party, that entered the room and surrounded us and attacked. They picked up the chairs and started throwing them around. The immediate reaction of this nuclear explosion was the concern expressed by the people of Hiroshima. They organized a group by the name of Citizens Group of Hiroshima for promoting peace between India and Pakistan. And they invited me from Pakistan and Yagesh Kamdar, a peace activist from India, to visit Hiroshima and see for ourselves what devastation and horrendous impact. I started organizing students groups to visit Hiroshima. They would have students from India as well, and the interaction between the two. At first, Pakistani children were very apprehensive of meeting the Indians, but children are children, and within an hour they'd be talking to each other and laughing and enjoying themselves.
The student movement in Guatemala was very strong, and it was the only public venue to express political opinion. Luz continued organizing in her college years and was international secretary of the University Students Association.
I recall many times hearing my parents, please be careful. Please, better if you don't take part in those activities. It is really dangerous. You are not aware of what you are involved in this context. No one can speak up without putting his or her life at risk. That October 20, I recall I took part in the march. I took with me my oldest child. At that time he was 2 or 3. So I said to myself, no, it's really, I feel something bad here. It's dangerous that I am here with my child. So I decided to go home. I have just arrived at home. Some of my closest friends came to my house and told me, Oliverio Castañeda, the president of the University Association, has just been killed. He addressed a strong speech, and immediately after he spoke and he stepped up the scenario, he was killed. That event marked the beginning of a new and maybe the worst wave of repression in Guatemala. Hundreds of leaders of not only
that leaders of the students' movement, but leaders from the social movements were killed, were kidnapped, were tortured. We had to live all the life we had had previously in order to avoid to be killed by the members of the army. So we had to leave our house. I had to leave the university. I couldn't continue my studies. I had to leave my job. I had to change my name. I had to change everything to become hidden. I was doing that for continuing the struggle in which I have been involved. So I changed totally the type of activities I had to do. It was not only my decision. Thousands of young people did the same at that time.
During that time, Luz survived the deaths of her uncle and many of her colleagues, including her best friend from childhood, who was tortured, killed, and then set on fire.
We will be back next week at the same time with the second part of the documentary Leading the Way to Peace, produced by John B. Kroc Institute for Peace and Justice, University of San Diego. Thank you for watching us. We look forward to your feedbacks. Our email address is youthdya@gmail.com. Have a nice week. Namaste.